It was late afternoon when the restaurant began to fill up. The warm smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread floated through the air, mixing with the soft chatter of customers and the faint clinking of glasses. The place wasn't fancy, but it had a kind of charm that made people feel comfortable. Wooden tables, dim lights, and small plants on every corner gave it a cozy touch. The sound of an old ceiling fan hummed quietly above the crowd. Emily Carter moved between the tables with a calm smile. She had worked at this restaurant for almost 3 years, and though the pay wasn't much, she liked the people and the sense of belonging. Her uniform was a little worn, her shoes slightly scuffed, but her spirit was warm and bright. She remembered everyone's orders by heart, always adding a small kindness to her service, an extra napkin, a refill before being asked, a soft word when someone looked tired. It was a Friday evening, one of the busiest times of the week. The restaurant buzzed with energy as families gathered for dinner and couples leaned close over their meals. Emily hurried from the kitchen to the tables, balancing plates with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. She was tired, but she didn't let it show. Then, just as she turned from one table, the door opened and a tall man in a dark gray suit stepped in. He looked out of place among the families and workers who usually came here. His watch gleamed under the warm lights, and his shoes looked like they had never touched dust. He had a confident, almost bored expression, as if nothing in the room could surprise him. The hostess greeted him, but he simply nodded and looked around as if searching for a spot that wouldn't ruin his mood. Emily noticed how people turned their heads slightly to look at him. He had the air of someone used to being noticed. "Table for one?" the hostess asked politely. "Yes," he said in a calm but detached tone. He was seated by the window, where the faint evening light touched his sharp features. When Emily saw that he was at her section, she quickly smoothed her apron and approached him with her usual friendly smile. "Good evening, sir. Welcome. Would you like to start with something to drink?" she asked. He looked up briefly, his eyes scanning her face for a second longer than most customers did. "Coffee," he said. "Black, and make it strong." "Of course," she said, writing it down. "Would you like to see the menu?" "Sure," he replied, but his tone made it sound like he wasn't really interested in the food. As Emily turned to leave, he glanced around the room again. The restaurant was simple, but it had one unusual feature: an old upright piano standing in the corner near the window. The instrument had been there for years, unused except for the rare occasions when a customer played it for fun. Its wood was scratched and a few keys had lost their shine. Most people didn't even notice it anymore, but this man did. When Emily returned with his coffee, he pointed toward the piano. "Does anyone ever play that thing?" he asked, his voice carrying a mix of curiosity and mockery. Emily smiled politely. "Not really, sir. It hasn't been played much lately." He raised an eyebrow. "That's a shame. An instrument like that should either be played or thrown out." "It still sounds good," she said softly. "Just needs a little love." He chuckled, a low sound that seemed half amused, half dismissive. "Do you play?" Emily hesitated. "I used to. A long time ago. Used to?" he repeated. "So you gave it up?" She nodded lightly, trying not to sound personal. "Life got busy, I guess." He leaned back in his chair, a small smirk appearing on his face. That's what everyone says when they stop doing something they're good at. "Life got busy." Emily didn't respond. She just smiled politely and asked if he was ready to order. But he wasn't done. "Tell you what," he said, tapping his cup with a silver spoon. "Why don't you play something for me? Just one song. I'll tip you double if it sounds decent." Her smile faded a little. "Oh, I don't think I could, sir." "It's been years," he shrugged. "So what? It'll be fun. Unless you're afraid you've forgotten how." Emily stood there quietly, not sure how to respond. His words weren't cruel, but there was a challenge in them. A hint of arrogance. The few nearby customers had started to notice their conversation, their curiosity quietly growing. "I really should get back to my tables," she said with a soft laugh. "Trying to keep things light, come on," he pressed, clearly entertained by his own dare. "One song. You said it still sounds good, right? Let's hear it." Emily hesitated again. A tiny part of her wanted to do it, just to show him that the world wasn't as small as he thought. But another part of her, the quieter, more cautious one, reminded her that she hadn't played since her mother passed away. The piano had always been their connection. After her mother's death, every note felt heavy, almost painful. She forced a polite smile. Maybe another time, sir. He smiled faintly, sipping his coffee. All right. Guess some things really are forgotten. The words stung more than she wanted to admit, but she walked away before she could let him see that. As the evening went on, the man finished his meal and stayed for a while, occasionally glancing at the piano. Emily kept working, pretending not to notice him watching her. Still, the thought of the dare wouldn't leave her mind. Why should she care what he thought? Yet somehow she did. In the kitchen, her co-worker Lisa whispered, "What did that guy say to you? He looks like someone from one of those business magazines." Emily gave a small shrug. "Nothing much. Just some joke about the piano." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "You play that thing? I didn't know you could." "Used to," Emily said softly. Lisa smiled. "Then show him." "I mean, come on. That guy looks like he needs to be humbled a bit." Emily laughed quietly but shook her head. "No, I'd rather not make a scene." But the idea stayed in her mind like a tiny spark refusing to die out. After a few minutes, she noticed the man finishing his drink. He placed his cup down neatly, checked his phone, and stood up to leave. For a second, Emily felt a strange mix of relief and regret. Maybe it was better this way. No need to stir up old memories. Then something unexpected happened. As he reached the door, the manager called out, "Excuse me, sir. Would you like to leave feedback on your visit?" The man turned and smiled politely. Everything was fine. "Though I must say you should do something about that piano. It's just sitting there wasting space." The comment made a few heads turn. Emily from across the room felt her chest tighten. She took a step toward the piano without even thinking. Before she knew it, she was standing near it, her fingers grazing the edge of the keys. "It doesn't take up space," she said softly, not raising her voice but loud enough for him to hear. "It belongs here." The man paused, amused again. "Then prove it." Her co-workers looked at her, half excited, half nervous. The whole restaurant seemed to quiet down a little, sensing something about to happen. Emily took a deep breath. Her heart raced. She wasn't sure if she was doing this to prove him wrong or to prove to herself that she hadn't lost that part of her. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the cover and looked at the old, uneven keys. She sat down. The man crossed his arms, leaning slightly against the wall, a small, confident grin still on his face. But there was something different in his eyes now. Curiosity. Emily's fingers hovered above the keys, unsure where to start. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the soft clink of a fork somewhere in the back. Then she pressed one note. It was slightly off tune, but the sound was familiar. A memory flashed in her mind. Her mother's gentle hands guiding hers over the piano, the warmth of sunlight streaming through their small apartment window. She pressed another key. Then another. The man's grin faded just slightly. Emily stopped and took a deep breath. She wasn't ready yet. Not tonight. The memories were too close, the emotions too raw. She gently closed the lid and stood up. "Sorry," she said quietly. "Not tonight." The man nodded slowly, not mocking her this time. "Fair enough." Then he turned and left, his footsteps fading as the door swung shut behind him. The restaurant was quiet for a moment before everything went back to normal. The sounds of laughter, the clatter of dishes, the smell of food. But Emily stood still for a few seconds, staring at the piano. Something inside her had stirred that she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe she had been afraid to play. Or maybe she had just needed someone to remind her that she could. She smiled faintly, placed a gentle hand on the piano and whispered to herself, "Maybe tomorrow." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of Emily's small apartment. The place was quiet except for the ticking clock on the wall and the faint sounds of traffic outside. She sat by the window, sipping a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. The image of the man from last night still lingered in her mind. His voice, his challenge, that small smirk when he dared her to play. It all replayed like a scene she couldn't turn off. She didn't even know his name, yet something about that moment had unsettled her. Maybe it was the way he made her feel small, like her dreams were nothing more than childish hobbies. Or maybe it was because, deep down, she knew he wasn't entirely wrong. She had stopped playing. She had buried a part of herself under work and responsibilities, convincing herself that life had no room for music anymore. Emily glanced toward the corner of her living room. There, covered by a thin white sheet, stood her old keyboard. It hadn't been touched in years. Dust had gathered around the edges and one of the black keys was chipped, She used to play it every evening after work when her mother was still alive. It had been their time together, sharing melodies and laughter. But after her mother passed, the silence became too heavy. She put down her cup and walked over to it. Slowly, she pulled the sheet off, revealing the keys beneath. Her fingers brushed over them lightly, almost afraid to press. Then she closed her eyes and touched one note. The sound was faint and uneven, but it stirred something inside her, something warm and sad all at once. For a long time, she just sat there, letting the memories come and go. She thought about the restaurant, her co-workers, and that old piano in the corner. She thought about the man's words, "But prove it," she sighed. Maybe she should have played. Maybe she still could. By afternoon, she was back at the restaurant for her shift. The place was quieter than usual, the calm before the evening rush. She greeted the cooks, tied her apron, and began setting tables. Lisa, her co-worker, leaned against the counter with a grin. "So," Lisa said playfully, "how's the piano prodigy today?" Emily laughed. "Oh, don't start. I didn't even play." "Yeah, but everyone thought you were going to. The whole place got quiet last night. Even chefs stopped yelling for like 10 seconds. Emily smiled. "Well, it's probably better that I didn't. I'm rusty." Lisa tilted her head. "Rusty or scared?" Emily looked at her, half amused. "Both, maybe?" "You should play tonight," Lisa said. "There's no rule against it. You might even get a crowd." "Yeah, right," Emily said with a light chuckle. "I think people come here for the food, not a waitress trying to relive her childhood dreams." Lisa smiled knowingly. Sometimes people come for something they didn't expect. Before Emily could respond, the doorbell chimed, signaling the arrival of a new customer. She turned toward the entrance and then froze. The man from last night had just walked in. He wasn't wearing his suit this time. Instead, he had on a simple dark sweater and jeans, but he still carried that same air of confidence. He looked around briefly before spotting her. When their eyes met, he smiled slightly and nodded as if to say, "I remember you." Lisa whispered, "Oh, look who's back." Emily took a deep breath and walked over to him, trying to keep her tone professional. "Welcome back, sir. Would you like your usual table?" "If it's available," he said calmly. She led him to the same seat by the window. He sat down and glanced toward the piano again. The corner of his mouth lifted in a faint smile. "Still there," he said. "Yes," she replied simply. "Still untouched?" "For now," she said, setting down a menu. He chuckled quietly. "I suppose you're still not ready to play?" Emily folded her hands in front of her. "I didn't say that." He looked up, a little surprised. "Oh, so you've changed your mind?" "Maybe," she said, her tone calm but steady. "Depends on the song." He leaned back, clearly intrigued. "Then I'll have to stay for dessert." She gave a small amused smile and walked away to place his order. But her heart was beating faster than before. What was she doing? Was she really thinking about playing? The thought scared her, but at the same time it lit a small spark of excitement. As the evening crowd began to fill the restaurant, Emily found herself glancing at the piano more often. Her hands itched to play, though she still wasn't sure what she would even perform. Something simple, she thought. Something that felt like home. The man, she learned his name was Daniel, stayed longer than most customers. He ordered coffee again, just like before, and seemed in no hurry to leave. Occasionally, she caught him watching her as she worked. Not in a rude way, but as if he was trying to figure her out. When she finally had a break, she leaned against the counter near Lisa. "You know, he's waiting for you to play," Lisa whispered. "I know," Emily said softly, "so why not do it? You have the whole room cheering for you this time." Emily looked around. A few of the regular customers smiled encouragingly when they noticed her glance toward the piano. Even the manager, who usually worried about noise, gave her a small nod. Maybe it was time. She walked slowly toward the piano. The room wasn't silent this time, but as people noticed where she was headed, the noise began to fade on its own. Daniel looked up from his coffee, setting his cup down carefully. Emily sat down and rested her fingers on the keys. They felt cold at first, unfamiliar but not unfriendly. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and began to play. The first notes were soft and uneven, like she was testing her own memory. But as her fingers found the rhythm, the sound grew stronger, smoother. A simple melody filled the air. A song her mother used to hum while cooking dinner. It wasn't fancy, but it was full of warmth. The chatter in the restaurant faded completely. Forks stopped mid-air. Even the cooks peered through the kitchen door. The sound of the piano seemed to touch something in everyone, a quiet reminder of something pure and real. Daniel sat motionless, watching her. The playful smirk he always carried was gone. His eyes softened as he listened, as if the music reached a part of him he hadn't felt in years. Emily kept playing, letting the melody guide her. For a few minutes she forgot about everything. The customers, the noise, even Daniel. It was just her and the piano, speaking in a language that didn't need words. When the final note faded, the room remained silent for a heartbeat. Then applause broke out. It wasn't loud or forced, it was genuine. People smiled, some even stood to clap. Emily looked around, her cheeks turning red as she smiled shyly. Daniel clapped too, but slowly, almost thoughtfully. When she looked at him, he gave a small nod, one that said more than words could. "That was beautiful," someone from the back said. Others murmured in agreement. Emily stood, her heart racing, and gave a small bow before hurrying back to the counter. Lisa met her with wide eyes. "That was amazing. I didn't know you could play like that." Emily laughed nervously. "I didn't either." She turned to glance at Daniel's table, but he was already standing, reaching for his wallet. He placed a bill under his cup and looked at her one last time. "I was wrong," he said quietly when she approached. "Some things are worth remembering." She smiled softly. "Thank you." "No," he said, returning the smile. "Thank you for reminding me what real talent sounds like." Then he left just as quietly as before. After he was gone, Emily walked to his table and picked up the bill. Under the money was a small folded note. She opened it. In neat handwriting it said, "Don't stop playing again." Her chest tightened. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. Later that night, after everyone had left, she stayed behind to clean up. The piano stood in the corner, quiet again but no longer forgotten. She sat down once more and pressed a single note, letting it echo softly through the empty room. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel afraid of the sound. When she walked home, the cool night air felt lighter somehow. She didn't know what would come next, but for the first time she felt that maybe her music wasn't gone. Maybe it had just been waiting for the right moment to return. And maybe, just maybe, that moment had finally come. The following week passed more quietly than usual at the restaurant, but something had changed. The piano that had once been only a dusty decoration now seemed alive again. Customers noticed it as soon as they walked in, and a few even asked, "Is the waitress going to play again tonight?" It became a small mystery, a little story that floated through the town. People loved to talk about how a simple dare had led to something so beautiful. Emily didn't expect any of it. She just went back to work as she always did, though she felt lighter somehow. Every time she passed by the piano, she felt a quiet pull toward it, as if it were waiting for her to sit down again. Her coworkers noticed the change too. Lisa often teased her gently, saying, "You started something, you know that? You can't just stop now." Emily would smile, but deep down she wondered if she really could keep playing. The last performance had come from somewhere deep inside her, a mix of emotion and memory she hadn't planned. What if she couldn't do it again? What if that one night had been just a moment, something that couldn't be repeated? Then one evening, as she was wiping down tables, the door opened and she looked up. Daniel was back. He wasn't in a rush. He entered quietly, nodding at the hostess and looking around like someone returning to a familiar place. When his eyes found Emily, he smiled faintly and gave a polite wave. It wasn't the confident, teasing smile he'd had before. This one felt different, almost gentle. She walked over, trying not to show her surprise. "Good evening, sir," she said with a small smile. "Your usual table?" "If it's free," he said. "And you can call me Daniel." "I think we've moved past, sir." Emily laughed softly. "All right, Daniel." He followed her to his table and sat down. The air between them felt easier this time, less formal, almost friendly. "I wasn't sure you'd come back," she admitted as she set down a glass of water. "Neither was I," he said, "but I had some business nearby. Thought I'd stop in and see if the music was still alive." "You might be disappointed," she said lightly. "I haven't played since that night." He tilted his head. "Why not?" She shrugged. "I guess I'm still trying to figure out if it was just luck." "Luck?" he said, sounding almost amused. "That didn't sound like luck to me." She looked down, hiding a small smile. "Well, maybe next time I'll prove it wasn't." "I'll hold you to that," he said with a grin. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he added, "I used to play a little, you know." Emily looked up, surprised. "Really?" "A long time ago. Before life got busy," he said, echoing her own words from their first meeting. "I wasn't very good. My teacher told me I played like I was doing math, not music." She smiled. "Maybe you just needed the right reason to play." "Maybe," he said softly. "Or maybe I just needed the right dare." The way he said it made her laugh quietly. There was something about him tonight that felt different. The arrogance she had noticed before seemed gone, replaced by something more thoughtful. She wondered if her music had something to do with that. As the evening went on, Daniel stayed longer than most customers again. He ordered dinner, then dessert, then another cup of coffee. They spoke a little between her rounds of serving other tables, about small things like the weather or the music that played softly through the restaurant speakers. He seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. Before leaving, he reached into his coat pocket and took out a folded brochure. He placed it gently on the table. "I don't know if this will mean anything to you," he said, "but there's a small music showcase in the city next month. Local performers, new artists. Nothing big, but it's a nice event. You should think about signing up." Emily blinked, taken aback. "Me? No, I couldn't. I'm not." "You are," he interrupted gently. "You just don't believe it yet." She looked at the brochure. The cover showed a bright stage and a smiling young pianist under a banner that read, "City Lights Music Night." Something about it stirred her curiosity. Still, the idea of playing in front of strangers made her stomach twist. "I'll think about it," she said honestly. "That's all I ask," he replied, standing. "And next time, maybe I'll hear another song." He left her with the brochure and a quiet smile. That night, after closing, Emily sat by the piano again. The restaurant was empty except for the soft hum of the fridge and the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. She unfolded the brochure and read it slowly, tracing the pictures with her fingers. She could almost imagine herself there, the lights, the applause, the sound of her own music filling the room. Then she shook her head and laughed softly to herself. "What am I thinking?" she whispered, but still she stayed there for a while, just staring at the keys. Finally, she reached out and began to play. The melody was gentle, uncertain at first, but grew stronger as she went. It was a song she had never played before, something new that came straight from her heart. As the last note faded, she looked up and noticed Lisa standing by the door, smiling. "You really should go to that showcase," Lisa said. "You saw that brochure?" Emily asked. "Of course. You left it on the counter." "Everyone saw it." "We all think you should do it." Emily laughed softly. "You guys are unbelievable." Lisa crossed her arms playfully. "Come on, you have to. You have something special. People need to hear it." Emily looked back at the piano. The thought of performing again scared her, but it also filled her with a kind of quiet excitement. Maybe it was time to stop hiding her music. The next few days she started practicing again. Every night after work, she stayed behind for an hour or two, playing softly while the lights dimmed and the restaurant emptied. Sometimes Lisa stayed to listen. Sometimes the manager peeked in, pretending to clean just to hear her play. Her fingers grew steadier, her confidence slowly returning. One evening as she played, she noticed someone sitting at the back corner of the restaurant. Daniel. He wasn't wearing a suit this time either, just a simple shirt and jacket. He didn't say a word. He just listened. When she finished, she looked up, startled to see him there. He stood and clapped lightly. "You're getting better," he said. "How long were you sitting there?" she asked. "Long enough to know you're ready for that showcase," he said with a small smile. She laughed nervously. "I haven't even signed up yet." "Then I suppose that's the next step," he said. "And don't worry, I'll be in the audience." "You won't be alone." Something in his tone made her pause. There was no trace of challenge now, only encouragement. She nodded slowly. "All right, I'll think about it seriously this time." "Good," he said, "because sometimes the things that scare us most are the ones that change us the most." After he left, she sat for a while, thinking about his words. She had spent so many years hiding behind work and routine, telling herself she didn't have time for music. But maybe what she really didn't have was courage. That weekend, she filled out the form. Her hands trembled as she wrote her name. But when she pressed submit, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. In the days that followed, she practiced more than ever. Some nights she stayed so late that the manager had to remind her to lock up. Music began to fill her days again like an old friend returning home. And each time she played, she remembered Daniel's face in the crowd that night when she had first dared to play. His expression wasn't one of arrogance anymore, it was awe. It reminded her that sometimes even the smallest moments can change people in ways they never expect. She didn't know what would happen at the showcase. She didn't know if she'd play perfectly or make mistakes. But for the first time in years, she didn't care. She wasn't doing it to prove anything. She was doing it because she loved it. And as she sat there one evening, finishing another song in the quiet restaurant, she smiled to herself and whispered, "I think I'm ready." The night of the showcase arrived faster than Emily expected. For days, she had practiced every free moment she could find, her fingers dancing across the keys of the restaurant piano until her coworkers could hum every tune she played. The nervous excitement in her chest grew with each passing day. It wasn't fear anymore, at least not entirely. It was the feeling of stepping into something she had always wanted to do but never dared to try. The small city theater where the showcase was held had an old charm to it. Red velvet curtains, golden lights, and rows of seats that smelled faintly of dust and history. Backstage, performers tuned guitars, checked sheet music, and whispered words of encouragement to each other. Emily stood in the corner, clutching her hands together, trying to steady her breathing. She had never been part of anything like this before. She wore a simple navy blue dress that one of her coworkers had lent her. It wasn't fancy, but it made her feel confident. She had tied her hair back neatly and wore the smallest bit of makeup, enough to make her look presentable under the stage lights. "You'll be great," Lisa had said earlier that day, giving her a quick hug before she left work early to get ready for the show. "We're all coming to watch you. Don't freeze up on us now." Emily had laughed nervously, but her hands were shaking. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight. For so many years, she had blended into the background, taking orders, cleaning tables, and living quietly. But tonight, people would be looking at her, listening to her. As the performances began, Emily peeked from backstage. One by one, local singers, bands, and musicians took the stage. Some were confident, others stumbled a little, but everyone received warm applause. The atmosphere was friendly and supportive, yet her stomach still twisted with nerves. Then she saw him. Daniel sat near the front row, dressed simply but neatly, his attention fixed on the stage. When he caught sight of her peeking out from the curtain, he smiled and gave her a small thumbs up. The sight of him calmed her in a way she didn't expect. For weeks he had pushed her, believed in her, and reminded her that she still had music in her. Now seeing him there made her feel like she wasn't doing this alone. When the announcer finally called her name, Emily's heart skipped. The sound of clapping filled the room as she walked out under the bright lights. The piano sat waiting in the center of the stage, shining under the glow. She took a deep breath and sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them on the keys. The lights were warm on her face. She could barely make out the crowd, but she knew they were there. For a moment, she thought she might freeze. But then she remembered something her mother used to tell her. Play like the music is just for you, and everyone else is lucky to hear it. So she closed her eyes and began. The first notes were soft and delicate, like raindrops falling on glass. The melody grew stronger with each measure, filling the room with something pure and real. It was a song she had written herself, one she had created late one night after work when the restaurant was empty. It carried all her feelings, loneliness, hope, love, and gratitude woven into every note. As she played, the nerves melted away. Her hands moved naturally, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. It wasn't just music anymore. It was her story. Every moment of struggle, every bit of kindness she'd received, every tear she'd held back, it was all there in the sound of the piano. In the audience, people leaned forward, caught in the emotion of it. Even the host, who had been checking his list of acts, looked up and watched quietly. The music filled every corner of the room, reaching hearts that hadn't expected to be touched that night. When the final note faded, silence filled the theater. For a moment it was so quiet Emily thought she had made a mistake. Then the applause began. Soft at first, then louder, then rising into a standing ovation. She looked up, her breath catching in her throat. People were on their feet, clapping, smiling, cheering. She blinked, stunned. Somewhere in the front row, Daniel stood, clapping slowly, his eyes bright with pride. Emily rose from the piano and gave a small, grateful bow. Her heart felt light, her eyes watery. For the first time, She wasn't the waitress who cleaned tables or took orders. She was a musician, someone who had shared something real. Backstage, as she stepped off the stage, a few other performers congratulated her. "That was beautiful," one of them said. "You could feel every note." "Thanks," Emily said softly, still catching her breath. "I didn't think anyone would like it that much." "Are you kidding?" Another laughed. "You were amazing." "You have to come back next time." Emily smiled shyly, her heart full. She sat in the corner for a moment, just letting everything sink in. Then she heard a familiar voice. "I told you," Daniel said as he appeared backstage, smiling warmly. "You just needed the right reason to play." She laughed softly. "I guess I did. You were incredible out there," he said. Everyone was completely still. "You made the whole room feel something." "I was so nervous," she admitted. "I thought I was going to mess up." "You didn't," he said firmly. "And even if you had, it wouldn't have mattered. What people felt tonight, that's what music is about." She looked at him for a moment, grateful. "Thank you, Daniel. For everything. If it weren't for you, I never would have touched that piano again." He smiled faintly. "You would have. Maybe not that night, but someday. You were just waiting for someone to remind you." For a few moments they stood quietly, the sounds of the next performer echoing faintly through the curtains. Emily looked around at the people smiling, laughing, and talking. She realized that this, sharing her music, connecting with people, was what she had been missing all along. Later that night, after the show ended, Daniel offered to walk her outside. The cool night air felt refreshing after the warmth of the stage. The city lights flickered gently and cars passed slowly on the quiet street. "So," he said, hands in his pockets, "what now? You going back to hiding behind the piano at the restaurant?" Emily laughed softly. "I don't know. Maybe I'll play there more often. People seem to like it." "I think they more than like it," he said. "But you could do more if you wanted." She looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you have real talent," he said. "If you wanted to study again to get back into music seriously, I could help. I know some people in the city who run programs for young musicians. You wouldn't even have to quit your job right away." Emily blinked, surprised. "You'd do that?" He nodded. "I would. You remind me of what I used to be like. Focused, driven, but afraid to take the next step." "I don't want you to lose that chance." She looked away, thinking. The idea of going back to school, of studying music again, felt impossible and exciting all at once. She hadn't let herself dream that big in years. "I'll think about it," she said softly. "That's all I ask," he said with a kind smile. They stood there for a moment in comfortable silence. Then she said, half teasing, "You know, for someone who started all this with a dare, you turned out to be pretty nice." He laughed quietly. "I told you, not all dares are bad." When she got home that night, Emily sat on her small couch, the sound of applause still echoing in her ears. She looked around her little apartment and smiled. Everything felt different now. She pulled out her old keyboard again and placed it near the window where the moonlight touched it. Her fingers rested on the keys as she whispered to herself, "I think I know what I want next." Then she started to play again, quietly, gently, just for herself. In the days that followed, people from town came into the restaurant asking about her performance. Someone had recorded a short video of her playing at the showcase and shared it online. The clip spread quickly, and soon strangers came in just to see the girl who had played the piano that night. Emily tried to stay humble about it, though her co-workers teased her about being famous. But deep down she was proud, not because of the attention, but because she had finally faced her fear. And true to his word, Daniel returned a few days later, a folder in hand. Inside were details about a local scholarship for musicians. He told her he had already spoken to the organizers about her. "You still have to audition," he said. "But after last week, I don't think that'll be a problem." Emily looked at the papers, then at him. "You really believe I can do this?" "I know you can," he said simply. That night after he left, she sat at the piano in the restaurant again. The place was quiet, lit only by the faint glow from the streetlights outside. She began to play a soft tune, one that carried hope in every note. For the first time in years, she didn't feel trapped in her routine. She didn't feel like life had passed her by. Instead, she felt like it was just beginning. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that one small dare had changed everything. A few months had passed since the night of the showcase, but the memory still felt fresh for Emily. Life at the restaurant had changed in small but meaningful ways. People still came in asking about the girl who played the piano that evening, and sometimes she would sit down and play a song or two during quiet hours. The regulars always clapped, and new customers looked pleasantly surprised when they realized the waitress could play like a professional. But something bigger had also changed, inside her. Emily was no longer afraid to dream. She had applied for the scholarship Daniel had told her about, and after weeks of waiting, she finally got the call. She had been accepted. When she read the email, her hands trembled and tears filled her eyes. It felt like her life was finally opening up in ways she had only imagined before. The day she told Daniel the news, he smiled wider than she had ever seen. They met at the same small restaurant where it had all started, the one where he had dared her to play. "I knew it," he said, leaning back in his chair, proud and content. "I told you they wouldn't be able to say no after hearing you play." Emily laughed, shaking her head. "You make it sound like it was easy. I was so nervous during the audition I almost dropped the sheet music." "But you didn't," he replied, his tone light but full of meaning. "You faced it. That's what matters." They sat for a moment, just smiling at each other. The air between them felt comfortable, full of unspoken appreciation. Emily looked around the restaurant and couldn't help but think how strange it was that everything had started here. The dusty old piano, the careless dare, the crowd that had fallen silent, it all led her to this point. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked suddenly. "Every now and then," Daniel said with a small smile. "I didn't expect it to go that way. I thought I was just making small talk. But I guess life surprises you sometimes." Emily nodded. "It does." As the weeks went on, she prepared for the next big step, moving to the city to start her music program. The scholarship covered her tuition, and Daniel helped her find a small but cozy apartment near the school. The day she packed her bags, her co-workers gathered at the restaurant to say goodbye. They threw a small party, decorating the place with handmade banners that read, "Good luck, Emily," and "We'll miss you. You better not forget us when you're famous," one of them joked, handing her a small box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a tiny piano charm. Emily held it close, smiling. "I could never forget you guys." Daniel arrived just as the party was ending. He helped her carry her bags outside where his car was parked. As they loaded the last suitcase, Emily looked back at the restaurant, feeling a mix of nostalgia and excitement. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," she said softly. The drive to the city was peaceful. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Emily stared out the window, her thoughts drifting between the past and the future. She thought about her mother, about the years she had spent putting her dreams aside, and about the man sitting beside her who had somehow changed everything with one simple challenge. "You know," she said after a while, "I don't think I ever really thanked you properly." Daniel glanced at her. "You don't have to. Seeing you happy is thanks enough," she smiled faintly. "Still, I mean it. You didn't have to care. You didn't have to push me, but you did. Sometimes people just need someone to remind them what they're capable of," he said. "You already had everything in you. I just happened to notice." When they reached her new apartment, Daniel helped her carry her things inside. It was small, a single bedroom with a little kitchen and a view of the street below, but it felt perfect to her. It was a place to start over. He set down the last box and looked around. "Not bad, cozy." "It's perfect," she said, smiling. He nodded. "Then it's perfect." There was a short silence between them, not awkward, just thoughtful. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "What's this?" she asked, taking it. "Just something to help you settle in," he said. "Don't argue, just take it." Emily opened it and found a check inside. Her eyes widened. "Daniel, this is too much. I can't take this." "Yes, you can," he said gently. "Consider it an investment. Not in money, but in what you're going to do." "I believe in you, Emily." Her throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you. I don't even know what to say." "Just promise me one thing," he said with a grin. "What?" "That when you play at your first big concert, you'll save me a front row seat." Emily laughed through her tears. "You'll have it reserved with your name on it." They said goodbye that night, and as Daniel drove away, Emily stood by the window, watching the city lights twinkle below. She felt nervous but also free. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what came next, The following weeks were full of new experiences. Music school was challenging but exciting. She spent long hours practicing, learning new pieces, and connecting with other musicians who shared her passion. Some days were hard, but she reminded herself of where she had come from and why she was there. Sometimes she would call Daniel to tell him how things were going. He always listened patiently, offering advice or simply cheering her on. Even though they were from different worlds, their friendship remained strong. Months turned into a year, and soon, the school announced an end-of-year concert featuring the best students. Emily was chosen to perform a solo piece. It felt like life had come full circle. When the night of the concert arrived, the auditorium was packed. As she peeked out from backstage, she saw him, Daniel, sitting in the front row just as he had promised. The sight made her heart swell. She took her place at the grand piano, the lights shining down softly. The audience hushed as she began to play. Her fingers moved gracefully, effortlessly, weaving a melody that spoke of hope, growth, and second chances. Every note carried a piece of her story, the night of the dare, the fear, the encouragement, the rediscovery of her dream. She poured everything she had into the music, and when it ended, the crowd rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Daniel stood too, clapping proudly, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. After the concert, Emily found him in the lobby. Before she could say a word, he smiled. "You did it." "I knew you would." She hugged him tightly. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Maybe not," he said softly, "but you're the one who took the chance." They stood there for a moment, surrounded by laughter and chatter from the audience. Emily felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The path hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Later that night, when she returned to her apartment, she placed her new music certificate on the wall. She looked at the piano in the corner, her constant companion through it all, and smiled. She sat down and began to play once more, not for an audience, not for applause, but for herself. The melody filled the quiet room, warm and peaceful. It was the sound of a dream reborn, of courage rediscovered, and of kindness that had changed a life. Far away in his own home, Daniel sat by the window, a soft smile on his face as he thought about how far she had come. The dare that had started as a passing remark had turned into something much greater. A reminder that sometimes, even the smallest actions can have the biggest impact, and so, in the simplest of ways, both their lives had changed. Emily found her purpose again, and Daniel rediscovered the joy of believing in someone else. It was a quiet, beautiful ending to a story that began with nothing more than a dusty piano and a challenge that neither of them would ever forget.